You sit down on your couch at the end of a long day. It feels soft. It feels familiar. You do not think about what is inside it. Why would you? But somewhere inside that cushion, chemicals were added years ago for a fire that may never happen. Some of those chemicals do not always stay where they were put. Your home is full of these quiet decisions. The foam in your sofa, the padding in your mattress, the plastic casing around your television, the cable running behind your desk. Each one may contain a flame retardant, a chemical added to slow how fast a material catches fire, or how fast flames spread once it does. That is the whole idea, not fireproofing, slowing. Here is the first thing worth understanding. Flame retardant is not the name of one chemical. It is a job description. Dozens of different chemical families have been used to do this job over the decades, and they do not all behave the same way in your home or in your body. Some are considered relatively low concern. Others have raised enough scientific concern that they were phased out of use. Lumping them all together is where a lot of confusion starts. So why did manufacturers add them in the first place? Rewind several decades. Household fires were a real and serious hazard, especially fires involving upholstered furniture and old-style foam. Regulators in the United States, including through flammability standards enforced by the U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission, pushed industry toward materials that resisted ignition. Flame retardants became a common tool for meeting those standards, especially in polyurethane foam, which burns easily on its own. The intention was genuinely protective. Slower ignition can mean more time to escape a fire. Chemists split these compounds into two broad categories, and this distinction matters more than almost anything else in this story. Additive flame retardants are physically mixed into a material, like foam or plastic, without forming a permanent chemical bond to it. Reactive flame retardants are chemically bonded into the material's structure during manufacturing, becoming part of the polymer itself. Picture two ways to add something to bread dough. One is folded in loosely, like nuts scattered through the mix. The other is kneaded so deeply it becomes part of the dough itself. Additive compounds are the loose ones. Because they are not permanently locked in, they can slowly migrate out of a product over time, especially as materials age, break down, or get disturbed. But how does a chemical actually slow a fire down? This is where the science becomes almost mechanical in the best sense. Most flame retardants work through one of three basic strategies, and understanding them removes a lot of the mystery. The first strategy is gas phase interference. Certain compounds, when heated, release gases that interrupt the chemical chain reaction fire needs to keep burning, effectively smothering the flame's fuel source from the inside. The second strategy is char formation. Some flame retardants react with heat to form a hard, carbon-rich layer on the surface of the material, almost like a thin shield of char. That layer insulates the material underneath from the heat above it, slowing how quickly the fire can spread further into the object. The third strategy is heat absorption. A few compounds absorb energy as they break down, cooling the surrounding material and buying critical extra seconds before ignition can fully take hold. None of these mechanisms make a material immune to fire. They simply change the timeline, and in a real fire, a slower timeline can be the difference between an evacuated room and a trapped one. This is also where history explains a lot about why these chemicals became so common in the first place. Polyurethane foam, the material inside most modern upholstered furniture, is highly flammable in its untreated form. It can ignite quickly and burn with intense heat, producing thick smoke in a short amount of time. A string of high-profile furniture fires in the United States decades ago, some involving significant loss of life, pushed regulators towards stricter flammability standards for upholstered products. Most notably, a California furniture flammability standard that effectively became a national benchmark for manufacturers because so much furniture was sold into that market. For years, that standard was most easily met by adding flame-retardant chemicals directly into foam. It is worth understanding that this standard has since been revised to focus more on smolder resistance of fabric, rather than requiring flame retardants inside the foam itself, which is part of why furniture manufactured more recently may contain far less of these chemicals than furniture made in earlier decades. That single regulatory shift is one of the quieter reasons flame-retardant exposure patterns have changed over time. This migration is central to understanding real-world exposure. A television casing or a foam cushion releases tiny amounts of these chemicals into the surrounding air over years. Those particles settle into household dust. You touch surfaces, you touch your hands to your face. Children spend more time on floors, closer to dust, and often bring their hands to their mouths more frequently than adults. This is one documented reason researchers have found flame-retardant compounds measurable in household dust and, through biomonitoring studies, in human blood and urine samples. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention runs a national biomonitoring program that has tracked several flame-retardant chemicals in the US population over time, which is one of the reasons scientists know these compounds are widespread in ordinary homes, not just in factories or labs. Now for the family that carries the most historical weight. Polybrominated diphenyl ethers, usually shortened to PBDEs, were once among the most widely used additive flame retardants in foam, electronics, and textiles. PBDEs are a family of brominated compounds, meaning they contain bromine atoms bonded into their chemical structure, which is part of what gives them their flame-slowing properties. Over time, research from agencies including the National Toxicology Program and independent toxicology studies raised concerns about certain PBDEs, particularly around persistence and bioaccumulation. Persistence means a chemical breaks down very slowly in the environment. Bioaccumulation means a chemical can build up inside a living body faster than the body clears it out, often collecting in fat tissue. Evidence from animal studies linked some PBDEs to effects on thyroid hormone regulation and neurodevelopment, and epidemiological studies in humans found associations between PBDE exposure and outcomes like altered thyroid hormone levels or effects on child development. The National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences, known as NIEHS, has funded a body of research following pregnant women and their children over time, tracking PBDE levels measured in blood during pregnancy against developmental outcomes measured years later. Studies coming out of that kind of research design are part of why scientists became more cautious about PBDEs specifically, since prenatal and early childhood exposure windows are considered periods when developing systems may be more sensitive to hormone-disrupting chemicals. It matters here to be precise about what that evidence does and does not show. An association found in a population study means a pattern was observed alongside exposure, not that scientists watched the chemical directly cause harm in a controlled human trial, which would not be ethical to run. Toxicologists build understanding through a combination of animal studies, cell studies, and human exposure data, layering different kinds of evidence to estimate risk. This layered process is genuinely how toxicology works, And it is different from either dismissing a concern outright or treating an association as proof.
Because of this accumulating evidence, certain PBDE formulations were voluntarily phased out by manufacturers and later restricted through regulatory action in the United States. And several PBDE compounds were added to the Stockholm Convention, an international treaty that lists persistent organic pollutants targeted for elimination or restriction worldwide. That phase-out is a documented part of chemical regulatory history, not a rumor. It also means something practical for your home right now. Furniture and electronics manufactured before those phase-outs, especially older upholstered furniture still in use, may still contain PBDE-treated foam. The chemical does not disappear just because the product is old. It stays in the material until the material breaks down or is disposed of. So what replaced PBDEs? Largely, organophosphate flame retardants, often abbreviated OPFRs, a newer and chemically different family built around phosphorus rather than bromine. These are now commonly found in foam, electronics, and some textiles. Research from agencies including the Environmental Protection Agency and academic toxicology labs has been actively studying OPFRs, and early findings have raised some of the same categories of question that PBDEs once did, including possible effects on hormone signaling. This does not mean OPFRs behave identically to PBDEs. It means the same scientific process of evidence gathering that eventually reshaped PBDE use is now actively underway for their replacements. Regulatory bodies, including the European Chemicals Agency, known as ECHA, and the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry, known as ATSDR, continue to publish exposure assessments as new data emerges. Picture a living room. A sofa purchased 15 years ago sits by the window. Sunlight has slowly aged the fabric. Underneath, foam that once felt firm has become slightly crumbly at the seams. Every time someone sits down, tiny amounts of dust rise and settle again. None of this is visible to the eye in any dramatic way. It is simply the slow, ordinary aging of an ordinary object. And yet, inside that quiet process, chemistry is happening, exactly as researchers have documented it in labs and in real homes. The living room is not the only place this story lives. Step outside it for a moment. The seat you sit on inside your car contains foam padding chosen partly for flammability resistance, sitting inches from you for however long your commute lasts, warmed by sunlight through the windshield, which can accelerate the slow release of chemicals from foam and plastic. The laptop on your desk and the cables running behind your television were built with flame-retardant plastics in their casings, a requirement tied to electrical fire risk rather than upholstery fire risk, but governed by a similar underlying logic of slowing ignition around a heat source. None of these objects are unusual or specially treated. They are simply ordinary products built to meet ordinary safety rules. And that same ordinariness is exactly why researchers study household dust instead of factories when they want to understand real exposure. The chemistry does not stay behind at the manufacturing plant. It travels home with the product and quietly becomes part of the space you live in. Here is the counterintuitive twist. Newer is not automatically safer, and older is not automatically more dangerous. Some newer flame-retardant chemistries were specifically developed to break down faster in the environment. Some older products, if left undisturbed and in good condition, may release very little. Risk depends heavily on the specific chemical, how it was used, how degraded the material has become, and how much exposure actually reaches a person over time.
Toxicologists call this dose response, meaning the amount and duration of exposure matters enormously in determining risk. Detecting a chemical is not the same as detecting a dangerous dose of it. This is one of the most consistently misunderstood ideas in chemical safety reporting. What does this mean for your daily life today? Nothing about this story means you should panic about your furniture or your electronics. It means understanding that flame retardants are not one villain or one hero. They are a large, chemically diverse toolbox that fire safety regulation has relied on for decades, with real benefits and real trade-offs that scientists are still actively studying. Reasonable, low-effort steps can reduce everyday exposure without requiring alarm. Reducing household dust through regular damp cleaning and appropriate vacuuming can lower the amount of settled particles in your space. Washing hands before eating removes surface residue before it has a chance to be ingested. Repairing upholstery that has become torn or crumbling keeps foam contained rather than exposed. Following product labels and local disposal guidance when replacing old furniture or electronics keeps treated materials out of informal burning or improper handling, which is one of the more concerning exposure pathways researchers have documented, since burning these materials can release far more concentrated byproducts than everyday use ever would. You do not need to inspect your sofa cushions or dismantle your television to understand this. You do not need certainty about every chemical in every object you own. What you need is the same thing science itself relies on: distinguishing presence from danger, association from proof, and one chemical family from another. The next time you sit down on your couch at the end of a long day, it will still feel soft. It will still feel familiar. But now you know that familiar does not mean simple, and comfort has a quiet chemistry of its own, one that scientists are still learning to read.